Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 20 of the Current Review podcast. Today, we will be talking about free will. Just kidding. We have Isaiah Lewis on, and he is the founder and manager of Rivian Updates, which is a really cool page you're on X and YouTube, correct?
Yes. X, YouTube, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, so many.
All right. Most of the social media platforms, and you are interested in getting involved in LinkedIn, so we'll have to talk about that later in the episode. But yeah, you offer some great content with Rivian, and you are currently now the host of the Out of Spec Podcast, correct? So got a lot on your plate right now. And I guess just to start things off, so how did you get into the automotive space with Rivian Updates, and what does that timeline look like?
Yeah, so I've been an EV enthusiast since I was like 11 and closer to 12. It was around 2015, 16. My brother, who just graduated high school, is an excellent networker, and he found someone who would loan him his Model S. He often went out of town, and so when this guy went out of town for weeks at a time, he would give my brother the Model S. This is early time when battery management, everyone wasn't exactly sure. People were still skeptical. And so he gave it to my brother, and I learned a lot about Tesla's electrification. And after that, I just fell in love. Of course, time passed. We've seen all of these startups and new electric automakers that have come into the space. And back in 2018, when Rivian first unveiled the R1T and R1S, I was just impressed. I just loved it. And there was something as Rivian grew and went further along that I just felt in my spirit that attracted me to the company. And the same like feeling that I felt with early Tesla. And so I just started posting about Rivian, and then it became like a almost daily thing at this point. It's just my life at this point.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then, so do you what's your schedule like when you post these stuff? Do you just is it mainly new stuff? Is it your insights? Like, how often do you cover Rivian information?
So before this year, with my Out of Spec gig, I'm sure we'll get into in a second, I haven't been focusing like all of my time on Rivian Updates as before. But it really is just a daily thing. I mean, every single hour of the day before, I'd be on my phone or laptop and I'm looking through all different social medias. An employee would post something on Facebook or LinkedIn and just get these little tidbits in news, and I would post that. And as I've become a Rivian owner, right, that's just posting all of the insights and information that I've learned about my car. And it really just feeds into the owners and enthusiasts and investors of Rivian, people who are into the company.
Cool. And there's been so much going on recently with Rivian. What was the biggest news story of 2024 with Rivian? I would assume it's probably in the realm of R2 and R3X, that launch. What do you would say are some of the biggest things that happened with Rivian that time?
It's got to be between R2, R3, R3X, and the Volkswagen joint venture.
Yes, that as well.
Now, the Rivian community, I think, as a lot of car communities now in the electric space, there is like an owner's enthusiast side and an investor's side. And so, of course, a lot of the investors and enthusiasts loved R2 because that just shows the future of the company. And then for the joint venture side, it was much more interest from investors. And of course, owners are interested as well because this means Rivians just get better. But it's just a throw up between those two. Yeah, that Volkswagen deal was a really big thing. And I think Oliver Bloom just made a statement like they're hoping to work more with Rivian on more than this joint venture. And so I think that that opens the door for all sorts of possibilities for people to think of, and people just get excited.
Interesting. Yeah. And I know that's always a tough line, at least in covering news, because you have the hardcore, investing group, and then the people who are like, oh, this is just a cool technology. Because you see that so much on social media. I'm sure, David, you see that as well. Just even with maybe I'm a little more familiar with Lucid and some of their news. And it's just you got people like Lucid to the moon, all this stuff. And then you got the people who are like, this is just a cool car that has 500 miles of range. And it's very interesting because I feel like sometimes there's a little bit of toxicity with some of the investing groups. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, it is. It's something that, to be honest, kind of plagued Tesla, especially
100%.
2021, 2020. I was a Tesla shareholder then, and I think even in myself, like I just became a bit ignorant almost. And when you're financially invested in something, it it just creates a different blind side for you, and you don't seem to look at things with a different perspective or open mind. Luckily, Rivian, although like other communities, has an investor side of things. It actually isn't as bad as I would say a lot of other automakers, and I think that's also what really attracted me early on.
Interesting.
Um, Even like Lucid 2022 and Rivian 2022, when they were first starting production of their vehicles, you know, the Lucid community on one hand felt more focused on the stock, while the Rivian community felt more focused on people did not care. They wanted their vehicles. And now today, there are a lot of more investors, and the investor community is just something you got to kind of look at with an open mind, kind of hear their perspective, but it'll never be the dominant and main focus of these communities.
100%.
Nice. It sounds like you focus more on the people who are sort of like owner enthusiasts that just love the brand over than the people that are kind of waiting and seeing what to do with their gambling money of like, where should I put my money at? I mean, but both are still relevant, right? Because what happens at the higher level impacts, like I'm a new R1S. I traded in my R1T for an R1S. So, but I went from Gen 1 to Gen 2, which is cool to sort of see those differences as well. But from like weird updates to from like I don't know if you got the one with the new patent for Rivian headlights with the I think it's carbon nanotube heaters, which is pretty cool. I think that's more like an enthusiast news that only some people care about. Investors care less about, and they probably care more about with the recent news. I think they're talking with the federal government on the new Georgia plant, trying to get a loan. It'd be interesting to hear like how you balance between the really niche news of like a patented headlight that people are geeking out about versus like, oh, like whether or not this factory in Georgia actually gets built. Probably a huge determining factor on whether or not they can build the R2s at the scale that they're talking about, right?
Yeah, there's almost nothing I can see that I can do to, I guess, facilitate what happens between people viewing it as more investor focused or news focused. I guess furthermore, my audience is actually, I think, more as a bit of a mix, but I think it's majority investor, to be honest, probably like a 60. And I haven't really tried to make it that way. I own Rivian stock, and I'm open about that. But I may talk about Rivian stock every 4 months, and it's just not something that I try to make my main focus. But what ends up happening is, right, I talk about some news, and even something like heated headlamps that we saw from a Rivian patent. Those spark up investors because it's just another reason, like, oh, the Rivian's better again versus the competition, and this only equals sales, which only equals more revenue and more profit. And so regardless of what the news is, if it's something to do with Rivian's growth, it's going to attract investors. But yeah, I try to focus on the owner side of things. And, most of the time I spent on Rivian updates, I didn't own a Rivian. And so I think that part of my growth was really me just making the news, and I didn't post as much of a perspective from an owner. And so that's kind of curated my audience to, again, that 60-40 split where 60% of it is investors, and the other 40 is a lot of owners and just regular enthusiasts.
Interesting. You said that you started off with Tesla. It'd be curious to hear your perspective on the differences between the Tesla audience and the Rivian audience. And then now that you're going to Out of Spec, you're probably hitting even like a wider audience of you've got your Hyundai Ioniq folks and your EV6 folks, and you're kind of opening up. I'd love to hear sort of your perspective on the differences between all these different communities that you've come across.
So I've never been this involved in a community before, but my experience with the Tesla community has always been, I'd say, positive. It can be a bit tribal at times. I think, again, that's something saw early, like 2021, 2020, big rise in Tesla stock. Even though Tesla's stock is doing great now, it actually isn't as bad as I would say then. And I think there was just an electric stock bubble, and that has kind of since passed. And for the most part, the communities are pretty much the same. I mean, they're full of people who like something that they have, whether it's the Tesla or the Rivian or their Ioniq 5 or 6 or EV6, and it interests them and it's something that they're passionate about. And yeah, it's regardless, are going to be people who think, okay, this is better than the other, and that's going to create more outrage. And someone might say something that can be a little like, oh, I don't like that. Like, for instance, Sawyer Merritt, which I love his page on Twitter. He posts a lot of Tesla news, and he made a tweet about Tesla sales versus Rivian sales and Lucid sales. And I was kind of confused because I was like, comparing these companies, well, that does make sense. They have different price levels here, and you're comparing an automaker that sells a vehicle for $40,000 on average versus automakers that sell vehicles for $80,000, $90,000 on average. And of course, you're going to see more sales with the automaker that's selling $40,000 vehicles. And so something like that, creates like a little spark in the community. But even then, I think people just have true intentions. I don't think anyone's really like malicious. Everyone just wants to talk about what they love.
Interesting. You got to go on LinkedIn then if you want some more. It's crazy because I think some of the I might make a post that's very it's just oh, hey, this is how much a Chevy Bolt was in 2017. Here's how much an Equinox is today. Here's the differences of the cars. Just showing the inflation of the cars, showing how much better technology is getting over time. And just the comments are insane. And it's I try not to read them, but sometimes I'll eventually get wind of them. And it's just people get furious over them. They're you're just insane stuff. They think I'm some crazy person who's trying to force people to drive electric cars. I'm literally not doing that. So do you get a lot of that, or it seems not as much?
A lot of the communities are separated. So I follow a lot of Tesla people and other EV groups. But for the most part, I could probably say something objective about Tesla and I won't have a million people in my comments. I just think it's maybe the crowd that I attract. And I'm sure Tesla people could say something about Rivian, and honestly, it's unlikely that I will see it immediately. But yeah, every now and then there'll be some, it's just part of tribalism. I haven't really seen a lot of that on LinkedIn too much. I'm going to start posting a lot of on my personal page more, but I've posted on my Rivian Updates page, and I think the CFO, a couple C-suite level executives started reposting my stuff. And out of nowhere, it was got a big boom. And so now I post something and immediately has likes. Because before, for a good year, I was posting nothing. I was posting a lot and getting 1 to 2 likes every post. So it just says keep trying. But yeah, really, even the comments there, I don't see a lot of craziness. But yeah, no matter what you say, someone's gonna have a problem with it online.
Yeah. Well, I think the difference with LinkedIn and maybe Twitter and YouTube is the fact that on LinkedIn, it's more of a personal thing. So if someone in your connection group likes something, then that would pop up in the other person's feed. And I think once you get to that level, it's your posts are going to be spread around to a bunch of different people who may not agree with, who may dislike anything that is even remotely pro EV, which I've seen. And I don't know, it's just a fun place to be because all my friends are telling me, they're you have 150 comments in your post. And I'm well, I didn't really read any of them. And it's just people fighting back and forth. So I feel I'm just well, I make a post and I'm we're off to the races and just see what's going on. But yeah, no, that's definitely interesting. Just the kind of tribalism in the EV industry, when really I think the big goal should be is we should have a bunch of really different cool electric cars on the market. So you got Rivian with a great SUV and pickup truck. You got Tesla with really awesome, more entry level, but also equally as impressive sedans and SUVs. You got Lucid with a high end sedan. So we have a bunch of different options on there. And I don't really see the need to for people to be oh, why are you choosing that car? It's they're all pretty cool. So yeah.
We're targeting the bigger picture of gas vehicles, but yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear how your opinion and posts might have changed since becoming an owner yourself, right? You said that you were able to stay relatively unbiased and objective sort of before, but now you can't because you own and drive one as I'm assuming as your daily driver. How do you think that actually owning and using one on a regular basis has changed your perspective?
I think I've still been able to kind of separate my feelings between just knowing about Rivian in the news versus actually being an owner. Because there are a lot of things that I will openly talk about that just Rivian has a problem with, which is like service is just one part of it. That's not something I experienced myself. And so now that I'm an owner, I can be honest and say Rivian service is extremely lacking. And for someone who lives 4 hours away from a service center, right, I kind of am concerned, like, okay, what would happen in the event? And that's something you just have to deal with. And, but yeah, I guess, I think it's just created more opinions. I've never been someone who is just like one-sided. And you can go through my tweets. I try to be as objective as possible with what I see in Rivian. And of course, right, I run a Rivian page. There's a bunch of Rivian stuff in my office. Regardless, like there's going to be bias there. But yeah, I never try to be like malicious or like super die hard and like totally blind or ignorant to what's happening around me. And I don't really think anyone in this space is. I just think you probably just get caught up in what's going on. Yeah, I'm trying to like kind of summarize your question there. Yeah, I guess as an owner, it's a different experience versus just posting the news. You'll see that a lot on the internet. A lot of people are enthusiasts of Teslas and they don't own one. And I would say once you start owning the vehicle, your opinion actually broadens and you're able to kind of certify some of the information for yourself. And some of it's bad and some of it's good.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to ask. I'm gonna write this down, but I definitely like to talk about your experience with the accident because that would be probably an interesting thing to talk about because I had a similar-ish scenario with my Model 3, but that was more the insurance company.
Yeah, that's giant.
Oh my gosh. They let you keep it?
So legally, I don't know what the agreement is with insurance companies. I don't think they're supposed to. But of course I asked and I was like, are you sure? They were like, no, we can't do that. I'm like, are you sure?
That's pretty crazy.
It's like I don't even know how you would like this, like here, like this is like crumpled beyond.
Yeah.
Like entire gashes. Yeah. I don't think it would ever. Oh, I'll show David. This is my fender of my truck.
What happened?
I got in. So listen, after the I-90 surge, I was driving back to Orlando. I just got off the plane, 10 p.m. I'm driving back to Orlando now. And yeah, front right tire popped and it exploded. The entire sidewall just went out. And I was passing a semi on my right. And my hands were on the wheel. It wasn't driver plus, but it kind of caught me off guard. And I immediately just swerved into the semi. And it kind of dragged me for a bit, like half a second. Luckily able to pull off and pull over onto the side of the road. But it was like right after the hurricanes. And so I was in like the middle of Florida where the hurricanes have just went through. So all the hotels were full because of linemen and electricians and stuff that were in town. And so I had my dog with me as well. And so they had to tow my car and the police had to take me around a million different hotels to see if anyone had rooms and no one had rooms. Luckily, the hotel let me sleep in their lobby.
Oh my gosh.
Like traumatic, not traumatic. It was just very like crazy. It was a very crazy night. I barely got any rest and I was able to get the car fixed.
I'm curious because I also, not as dramatic as you, had to repair my Rivian. There were sort of two incidents. Someone had sort of dinged the passenger rear panel on my truck, which apparently that's not like a necessarily easy fix. But then also my wife, because it's so long, she borrowed it and trying to get out of a garage didn't go out wide enough and hit the concrete pole and scraped up the entire side. And yeah, I mean, I feel like fortunate because I knew someone on the inside on the service side and they could sort of help me, but still it took, I think, 6 weeks from when I dropped it off in the shop to when I got it back. So I'd be curious to hear your experience.
Because all of it is dealing with So you said you just went on the service side. Did your car get repaired at a Rivian service center, or you went to like a collision?
A partner, because the service center, I'm gonna not as drastic as 4 hours, but Chelsea is about 2.5 hours for me. So for me, I went to a certified partner, which was only like 40 minutes away, and that was a little bit better. But they still had to send it down to Chelsea for recalibration anyways. And that's where like me having a friend was able to help track like where it was, because I was getting one thing from the collision center, and then my friend checked his system, and it was like, oh no, this is where it's at, because he could directly see it, whereas the collision center they have to get translated from somebody else, that sort of thing, you know.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, same thing. I went to a collision center partner in Orlando. Highly, recommend Windermere Auto Collision. They really focus on a lot of high-end cars. It was full of Rivians and Teslas when I got there. On I-Pace, I was like, gosh, I haven't seen one of these in forever. But yeah, the service part of it, because it's done by someone else, it really just depends on who you pick. My repair took 3 months. I got it Christmas Day. It's kind of weird. I took a bus Christmas Day from Tallahassee to Orlando, and yeah, got an Uber to a collision center at like 5 a.m., picked up my truck. I have family, my mom and stepdad live in Orlando, and so I spent Christmas with them. But yeah, it was 31,000 this repair for that entire side. The bumper came off. Luckily, it was nothing too structural. Most of it was cosmetic. But yeah, like you said, the repairs that you had, those are like really common. And so the Rivian bed, because it isn't separated, and this is the same thing with the Cybertruck, unlike even the Silverado EV and the GMC EV, but unlike conventional pickup trucks where the bed and the cab are separated, for the Rivian's case, the bed body panel is connected to the cab. And so if something happens to the bed, you end up having to replace the entire body panel side. And so that means you got to take off the doors, and you have to take off all of the wiring on pretty much everything on one side of the vehicle, and having to replace that one side. Now, there are some businesses that specialize on Rivian paintless dent repair, because something like this, we've seen like the headlines, $50,000 to repair, just one backside of the bed. And so now there are people that will replace it, will fix it, paintless dent repair for like $5,000, which is a lot better than what you'll see. And I think that's one big part of Rivian that I don't like, is maybe the repairability side. They are still very I wouldn't say they're anti-right to repair, but I just don't like that they're not pro-right to repair, if that makes sense. Now, these are $80,000 pieces of tech, so I get it. And they're a startup, and if something were to happen, news gets wind of something that wasn't their fault, it could totally ruin the reputation of the company. And so early on, I get why they're a bit defensive. But yeah, repairing specialty cars like this, low production, it can get pretty expensive.
Yeah, I heard the big thing is people who are trained to work on these vehicles, the number of people is pretty low that understand the process and know, yeah, you got to take off the entire side panel because it's one piece, which I didn't realize until I had to do it. And I looked there's no seams. It's one freaking piece. And then the other was parts, from my understanding. They don't have the advantages that, these traditional OEMs have in terms of layers and layers of tiered part suppliers, and they just have parts freaking everywhere for these things. So it's pretty easy to get it off the shelf. Whereas for Rivian, because they're small and the production units are small, the lead time on some of these parts can be really, really long. So that was my understanding. And even though it was disappointing, I understood. And again, I liked the vehicle enough where I was like, it's okay. I'll figure it out for 6 weeks. It's totally worth it. So yeah,
I was glad to have it back. And I think that also speaks to a larger issue with repair, is the amount of, manufacturers, part suppliers that Rivian has. And they had an issue back in October where a copper winding that goes in their enduro motors, the supplier, there was some sort of miscommunication, so they didn't make enough. And so they couldn't produce as many enduro motors as they needed. Of course, that affected sales, production, which then affected some deliveries. And as for the smaller automaker like this, they don't have as many part suppliers that are able to make things. And so that leads to wait times. Like my car was ready like late November, and then there were just some smaller things like, okay, we realize this wiring harness is broken, and that takes a week to, ship. And then the speaker that was the audio speaker that like lets people know that the car is near them at low speeds because it's an electric vehicle, it's quiet. That took 2 weeks to get there because they realized midway through that something was shorted. It ruined the speaker, so they had to replace it. And just these things take a lot of time versus, a lot of other automakers out there, legacy automakers, where their cars have been on the market sometimes decades, and they have the service networks, and they have the hundreds of part suppliers redundant. And so for something like that, it's a lot easier to get something fixed from a legacy automaker. But yeah, I love the car enough that I was fine. I honestly, people were like, you're not like super bummed. I didn't have a rental or anything. I have a Ford Focus. This was driving before, and I still had it. Luckily, didn't get rid of it before I got my truck. So I was driving that for a while. But I was so glad to have it back. It's a surreal experience.
Wow. Yeah. Because I had an interesting, even with Tesla, there's still issues with repairing the car. But what was interesting in my case, because I also got an X probably around the same time that you did. At least mine was August. It was literally like the first week I went back to school, and then a Kia Soul just like launched into me in the parking lot. So I guess it's a good rule to always keep your distance with Kia Soul drivers. But I didn't even see, like, I was literally just driving through the parking lot, and then she launched out. But the interesting thing was my car had to find a repair shop. It was literally just this like, looked like a barn, but they did a bunch of Teslas. So it wasn't a place that inspired confidence, I'll say that, but it was just a bunch of Teslas sitting out there, and they actually did like a phenomenal job with the repair. But the interesting thing with my case was like front quarter panel and front door. So not that serious. The total estimated price came out to like $1,000 on the Model 3. And that's just a crazy price, literally just for a door and a front fender. And obviously the price went up when they like took it apart and they're like, oh, this component's bent, we need a new one. But I had a really interesting case because the other driver's insurance like did not want to pay for it. So they only paid like $15,000 out of the $17,000 in damages. And they actually basically made the repair shop just eat the rest. And then they were supposed to give me diminished value on top of it. And then they're like, oh, you got an accident in South Carolina? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, we don't do diminished value there. So quick note, I don't like State Farm, but and the car took 2 months to repair. Everything was ready within like 2 weeks, but the insurance company just didn't want to pay. So they just kept holding it. So at least they gave me a rental Polestar in the meantime, but it was still just kind of ridiculous with that whole insurance thing. So I guess there's still some issues. Yes.
They really do. I should say my car was technically being repaired for 2 months. That first month, the hurricane had just happened and a lot was going on. So it took a month before my car moved from where it was at the tow yard. It was at the tow yard for a month. It's kind of bad. But the insurance adjuster loves Rivians. And he was like, oh, when he saw it pop up, he really wanted to take it. And so he jumped on it. But he says I've Geico, a lot of these high-end electric vehicles, Rivians particularly, said, would sit in like the adjustment book for weeks because no one wants to take them. And often what happens is, I can go to Copart and you can see all of the Rivians that have damage. And often enough, the damage isn't bad enough to where it should be totaled out. It's just no one wants to deal with it. No one wants to go out there and have to, estimate an expensive car. And because it's a specialty vehicle like this, you're often going to these body shops that are very high end and they're charging more and they're more difficult to work with. Luckily, my collision center had a really good relationship with Geico. But yeah, all of this like compounds to a situation where repairability for EVs, particularly these higher end specialty cars, becomes harder. And not even really specialty cars. The Model Y.
I think there's like an emergence of like two tiers of collision centers, right? Ones that sort of stay up to date on the newer vehicles like EVs, which are sort of specialty cars, but I think because there's so many of them, they're falling out of that. I mean, I think Andrew, you mentioned to me like one person you took it to was like, "Oh, this is this is high voltage.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
want to
that was
touch
crazy.
it."
Yeah, because I brought it into a paintless dent repair shop because it wasn't that bad. And at this time, State Farm was offering $6,000. They were like, "That's how much we'll give you." So I was just like, if I can get this cheaply repaired, good thing I did not do that route because that would have been a terrible idea because $6,000, the paintless dent repair was like $3,000. So I'd end up with a partially repaired car and then like $3,000, but then it wouldn't have actually been fixed on the Carfax. Long story. But what ended up happening is I brought it to this like place in like rural South Carolina, and he's like, "Oh, I can't touch this thing." He's like, "There's high voltage going through the car." And I'm like, "Dude, what do you mean?" And he's like, I had to kind of explain to him that the high voltage components are mainly isolated in the battery and all the orange cabling, not the body panels. So I think that's the thing too, just finding a place that knows what they're doing. But I guess normally you can find those easily with just make sure it's Rivian certified, Tesla certified, Lucid certified, whatever.
For sure. Yeah, and a lot of these cars are aluminum body too, right? Which I remember, when I think Ford was the first one that really sort of put aluminum bodies out there on a mass market scale, and people were freaking out about the aluminum bodies. But it's a little bit different, I think, to work on. But honestly, like, I think they're great. You really can't tell the difference. They seem super strong. And yeah, I don't mind it at all,
How hard was it for you guys to find like the collision centers or people to fix your vehicles?
It wasn't that hard in my case. I think you could have actually got, because I live like in Charlotte, North Carolina area, so there were actually a fair amount in that spot. I mean, Charlotte's a pretty big city. I think you could have gone. I checked with a few because there's like Hendrix, which is like the big group. If you're familiar with them, Hendrix. But they're like, what I kind of noticed with the Hendrick group is they charge a lot for their stuff for something that's probably not that much of a better job than other places. And they were like, "Oh, the other driver at State Farm," they're like, "We can't even get them to pay anything." So it was like, yeah, they were thinking that they would only do $6,000 compared to their like 12,000 estimate. So I don't know.
I mean, for me, it was pretty easy, but I will say, I think it's out of luck because there weren't a lot of options, right? Like there's basically we had to get my wife has a Model Y and that recently got dinged like a month ago. So we're scheduled to go to a collision center for that. But to find them, it was actually pretty easy. Rivian had a website where you just type in your location and they'll show you all the sort of certified partners. The only thing is there were like, I think one or two that were within a reasonable distance. So there wasn't a ton of options. I just got lucky that particular one that I went to that was closest also had a really good relationship with the insurance and the insurance adjuster. I talked to the insurance adjuster. He used to work there. So he like knew them really well. They had a good relationship, but I know that's not always the case. And then this other one for the Tesla, similarly, I think we only had two options, or go all the way to the service center in Boston, which is like 2.5 hours away, which we're like, this is a little bit better. But again, they're like the only place. They happen to have a good relationship with the other party's insurance company, but it's not always the case. And I think you definitely have to go check them out and make sure that they're qualified. I will say it was comforting when we went there to get the estimate. There was a ton of Teslas in the parking lot, and I was like, okay, these folks know what they're doing. They've done this a bunch of times, which is comforting. But again, though, I think it was just it's a little ding on, again, like the passenger rear fender, like around the wheel fender. But the estimate was a bit more than I think the other person in the insurance was thinking. I mean, body damage, I feel, is always like that. Like body damage sometimes didn't seem that bad, but then when you get the estimates, people are amazed. But hey, maybe I'm in the wrong business. Maybe I should just be doing body work. I don't know.
Yeah, and that's a one thing. And I think in your situation, Isaiah, since your Rivian is leased, I think you mentioned that in the last podcast, is that's nice because then you don't have to like fight for like diminished value. And then if your car's worth less, who cares? Because it's a bank's car at the moment. And I think that's kind of the thing I've learned in the past. I was before I bought my used Model 3 this summer, I was thinking about like leasing like a like Nissan Aria or something because there were some pretty good deals. Volkswagen ID4, case in point, $149 a month right now with like 1,000 down. And in that case, I like, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on leasing. But for me, it's like if you can get a cheap enough lease deal, like $149 a month, under 1,000 down, obviously taxes and fees, but you got to do that on any purchase or lease. But in that case, it's like you don't really have to worry about depreciation because it's not your car, and you still get to put 20,000 miles on that 2-year period. And I think in the ID4, you get like 500 kilowatt hours of free charging, which is kind of cool. But it's like if you get in an accident, it's like who really cares? As long as you didn't kill anyone, it's, you know, it's not your car. So what are your thoughts on leasing versus buying?
Leasing is probably the best way to get in an EV. I was just right before this, I was listening to CarPod, Doug Demers, and they were talking about all of the leasing options for EVs and how they had like $89 a month deals for, you know, a Chevy Equinox EV. And if you want to get an EV, it's honestly, lease is probably the best way to go. What's happening, at least what I see it is, it's still an emerging technology. So much is changing over generations. And so it's creating a lot of depreciation in a lot of the older electric vehicles. And so you have people who buy a car like Tesla Model S Plaid for $140,000. And then a couple years later, it's worth $50,000. And so that, like, depreciation is a huge problem. But with leasing, you know, you don't have to worry about depreciation. You don't have to worry about service. You don't have to worry about any of
even tires.
Right. Even tires, the theatrics of the car. And luckily, like, it's kind of funny. I got in the accident and I called Chase just to let them know, be like, hey, I got in an accident. And the way they just did not care that as long as it's not totaled, they don't care. Just make sure. What I was told is as long as the vehicle is in the condition that they gave it to you, right? So like nothing's, you know, you're not missing hood, right? Everything's pretty much the same. For the most part, they don't care. If it's totaled, then of course, then they have to be paid out from your insurance. And there's a whole, right, theatrics that have to go alongside there. But with leasing, it's simple. And for my case, my Rivian is $585 a month with $0 down. And
how'd you get it that low? Is that the rate that they normally charge?
So for the summer of 2024, Rivian had a lot of good lease offers. I mean, it got lower and lower. It was like 800 and then 700, and then you're seeing them get to 5. And then they had employee discounts. So if you know an employee, in many cases, people didn't know employees, and I would just connect them with an employee. I know someone from Rivian, and I was like, hey, can you give me like the employee discount that they were offering at the time? And they don't have any of these offers anymore. But it was $6,500 off plus the $7,500 tax credit. And then they were offering like $3,000 off if you get the large battery. And then I got the performance upgrade for free. So I'm getting an $85,000 vehicle. If I bought it, technically financing would be $65,000, but some of the offers you had to lease. So my money factor, like before, it's weird calculations, but like the interest was like negative because before, I guess before some of the discounts, which were like after the fact, it's kind of hard to explain, they were making no money on the car. And so it's crazy a lot of the lease offers that are out there. I'm not the only one. I know personally like 7 other people with Rivians who pay $500, $600 a month. And that was with $0 down. If you put the $0 down, I have a screenshot. My payment would have been like $281 or something. And so, yeah, leasing is just such an easy way to get yourself in a EV.
Yeah, and at least with Rivian, I mean, that's a crazy deal. So hats off to you. That's impressive for 85. Because I was thinking like if you got the lease price that low, I'm like, that has to be like a standard, but clearly not. That's a large with the performance upgrade.
Yeah.
And then do you have any other extras on the car at that price?
No. So I love LA Silver. That was the color I was going to go with.
Okay, cool.
It wasn't Compass Yellow, but they discontinued Compass Yellow. So I went with LA Silver, which is the cheapest. It's the standard Rivian paint option. So I was like, yay. It has the standard 21-inch road wheels, which I don't like those wheels. Not only exploded on me on the road, But just historically with other Rivian owners, it's not a good Pirelli. It's just wears really fast, and a little bit more road noise than some of the like newer options. Like Michelin makes Defenders for Rivians now, and even I think those are a harder all season tire, and they're still more efficient. It's weird, but yeah, it's just a standard interior, standard paint, standard wheels. But that was fine with it.
Yeah, that's so pretty crazy though. But yeah, no, because with leasing, it's really, and it's nicer when you lease through direct, like mainly Rivian, Lucid, Tesla, because it's just a lot easier. Because I was really thinking about leasing a car, but it's just so freaking hard to lease to find a good deal on one, because just to get information from like a regular like legacy auto dealership, you gotta like give them all your information, and then they give you a price that's usually going to not be the best price. They're not going to give you your best price up front, because they're going to expect you might negotiate it down. And it's just so difficult to get one from a legacy automaker. But that's a cool thing about going direct to consumer, is just type in all your stuff online, and it's like, okay, great, I got my estimate right here. Meanwhile, with dealerships, it's like, it literally took a week from a dealership just to get like their price. Because then like several days, they're like, all right, I'm like, hey, I'm Andrew, I live here, this is what I want to lease. And then they'll like email you back, and they're like, where do you live? And I'm like, I said it in the first email. And it's just like, yeah.
That's why I like how all these new car companies are going direct to consumer, right? Tesla, Rivian, and I know Scout, I think, is getting a lot of pushback because it's like VW, but honestly, I think that's the right move. I'd love to sort of see more car brands do that, right? I'm excited for Scout, which I don't know. Are you planning on doing Scout updates as part of your? And it's not really Rivian, but it's Rivian adjacent.
That's a great question. I actually experimented with Scout stuff, like when the Scout was first like coming out. Like a couple days before the unveil, I was like, the Scout unveil is blank days away, and it got like 100 likes. And I was like, interesting. So like, and then when it fully came out, I made like a thread, and it got like 50,000 views. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I should start a Scout updates. But honestly, I think my main focus will be Rivian. But I have like my own personal Twitter where I'll post like things that I don't think are deserving to go on Rivian updates. I try to keep the Rivian updates content to like just important things, or things that are worthy enough for people to look at. And so I end up posting a lot of like my free things, just day in the life on my personal page. And I post other EV stuff, and people seem to like it. So you never know. Maybe I'll have like a Tesla updates and a Scout updates soon. We'll see.
Fisker updates.
Right. I did that for April Fools. Yeah, that was.
It should just be like Fisker updated. Like it just kind of ended there. But there was one thing because I mentioned when we were talking about repairs, and I think this was a good point you brought up. So like some Rivians with like not much damage, you were saying we're going on Copart. What I noticed with Fiskers as well, because I was in a bit of a Fisker, I'm not sure what the word is, but like a Fisker phase last year. And I was just looking on like Copart, and there were some cars that were salvaged and like barely any damage. Like it was like just something like little screwed up on the rear bumper, like nothing serious. And these cars were just salvage titles. And I'm like, that would be an interesting vehicle if you could just buy one and see if you could do like paintless dent repair on it. And then you got a Fisker that you bought for like $15,000 salvage. And then I guess you'd have to see how long it would survive for.
Yeah, I'm on Copart now. There's a 2023 no body damage for $14,500 in
Fisker. Is that a bid, or is that like the asking price?
Right now it's bid to $125, but they have a buy it now for $14,500.
Wow.
For a Fisker. And I wonder if you can get the tax credit on that. If you
use tax credit, that'd be
that would be insane.
Yeah, you got a $10,000 Fisker. I already used up mine last year because it's you get one $4,000 tax credit every 3 years, and then I used up So you can buy I think up to 2 new EVs. I'm not so sure, but we'll have to check on that. I'm pretty sure you can do two new EVs every year, for the 7,500. But for
4,000.
unlimited leases, so you can do as many leases as you want. Because I looked into that just for investigative work. Not saying you could do that. But yeah, used EVs, it's one every 3 years, and we don't know what's going to happen in the upcoming weeks if that tax credit will go away. But like if you can get a Fisker for like 10 grand with like no damage on it, it's like if anything goes wrong on it, it's like, A, you didn't spend that much money. Well, I mean, that could still be a fair amount of money if it just turns into a paperweight, but like still the raw components there, like is clearly worth more than 10,000. So I don't know. Would you take the plunge?
Yes, I was looking at Fiskers. This was, I mean, Rich Rebuilds, right? Got one for like $10,000 from.
Saw that.
I was so impressed. I was like, oh man. And there are multiple more like you find on like Auto Tempest for, you know, like $16,000, $17,000 run and drive. And so I thought about it. I'm always on the look for like EV stuff, like Canoe. There was like an auction bid for Canoe vehicles. And I'm
Really?
like, yeah.
When was this?
That's cool.
It goes live in February, but
No way.
yeah, so all the, I guess the assets that they have still.
Wait, so whatever happened with Canoe? Because I haven't really been following them recently. Okay, so they're
So yeah, it's the investors
That's
paid
sad.
everything that exists. Everything else is the configurator's gone. I think they furloughed a bunch of employees like last month, and I think they're just trying to restructure. But at this point, they would need billions of dollars to at least $1 billion to get like fully started, right? And with their cash burn. And yeah, that's the scary thing with like these EV companies. It's like kind of easier to just start a new one with funding than just invest in something that's already existing. But Canoe, there was another company in Europe that had vans and they were selling off their assets. And yeah, I'm always looking.
It's so crazy to think about all the EV, because like we see the big three, which we all know that have succeeded, but like there's so many that didn't succeed. Like Lightyear, I know they're kind of working on a new product now. I thought Lightyear was really cool, but like obviously, how much is that gonna? It was a very 170,000 euro, I think at the time. A great concept though, I think is really cool, but like very expensive. But yeah, Lightyear, Sono Motors, which was the other solar powered European company, Lordstown, which that was a weird one.
They're still operating. I think they shifted to semis though.
Interesting.
They're not doing the pickup truck though anymore.
And then what about Mullen? That's an interesting one. Have you done any?
Mullen, I believe, owns, what is it? Lord's? No, Lord sounds a different company. So Mullen.
They own Bollinger Motors.
Bollinger. That's who I was thinking.
That's a weird company though, Mullen. I went on like a ride and drive of the Mullen SUV that like they said would be out the next year, but that was like in 2022, so it never really happened. That was an interesting product. But yeah, there's just so many EV companies that are like failing or have failed. And we only really see the winners, and like Fisker 1 and Fisker 2, just so many. It's definitely, it's a crazy space to be in.
I can't wait like 30 years from now where I have like so much, I have disposable money to just buy all of my EV dreams, and I can just get a Fisker for whatever it'll be then, probably like $5,000. Experiment on it and really like explore like, oh wow, it was so crazy. Cause I mean, Fisker only produced like 9,000 vehicles, which is still a lot.
Yeah.
But 9,000 examples of history. That's going to be interesting. But yeah, so many automakers have just gone under, and luckily, right, Tesla did well and they stayed there, and now they're in a safe place. Rivian's getting there. Lucid has the Saudis.
Yep.
Yeah, but those big three, like really, they are where they are. I think Polestar, for example, but really that's Geely. Yeah, what other like?
I mean, Aptera. We had Aptera on, and I think a lot of people are pulling for them, but I think everyone knows there's a steep climb for them to make it out. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember I did a story on them for Business Insider back in 2021, and this was like way earlier on with Aptera. And they're like, yeah, like, but 2022, we'll get the car out. And so obviously, like in the story, I'm just like, this is what they say. It's a cool concept, all this stuff. But like, dang, it is really hard to make a car. I think that's probably the one thing, like if I've learned one lesson, just like being in this area, is like building cars is not easy.
But that, exactly. Building a car is not easy at all. It's a lot of, Rivian burned like $1 billion for like the first year, $2 billion for like the first year, and then the second year after it's like $1 billion a quarter. Now, quarter four, they're expecting to be profitable, but most of it is, pretty much all of it is due to EV credits.
EV credits.
Right. But I think they're expecting quarter one, they'll likely not be profitable again, but it won't be as bad as losing the $40,000 a vehicle, $30,000, $30 to $40,000 a vehicle that they were previously losing. It should be closer to like $5. And then quarter 3 and 4, they should be profitable without the credits. But yeah, it's just not easy. I'm curious to see what it is like at that level, and to see all of the running around, and like, really, is it due to incompetence? Is it due to just poor management? Like, of course, it's a company, so things are going to fail. But for it to happen on so many, you know, I mean, I expected Fisker to happen for a while. I think his like daughter was.
Yeah, daughter was the director of like marketing, and then his wife, who has a like PhD in like microbiology or like some like very like scientific degree, was its CFO. And it was just like a very odd mix. And I'm like, I don't know. I think that's the thing, is like, it's probably not a great look to like have all your close family members working at your company. I mean, I think Henrik makes some amazing designs, but then does that translate into being a really good CEO of a car company? That's a debatable thing. But yeah, I think another thing with Fisker is it's like, with all like whatever they have left, because obviously we're probably all familiar with Karma Automotive, which was kind of which spawned from the original Fisker. But like, who would buy out the Fisker name now? Because it's like, it's just been thrown through the mud so much. It's like, how do you even rebuild something like that? And who even wants to invest into that area? And I'm sure like, and some of the stuff with the Fisker Ocean was like pretty cool. Like, I mean, I think decent platform. It wasn't like mind-boggling or anything, but it was like not a bad car. So I'm sure they have some R&D blueprints left on the table. But like, what do you think? Do you think someone would ever buy out Fisker?
Wouldn't it be crazy if Karma like bought out Fisker Ocean IP, and now with Karma again, and they're like, oh, you know, we get Karma SUVs, but no, it's, I guess the EV business. I have another idea. Say that question again.
Like, I guess I'm just wondering, like, and this was just something I had in the back of my head for a while, but it's like, would anyone even want to buy out Fisker's assets and the Fisker name? Because it's like, if you're restarting, like, I don't know what they really have to offer, because like, they don't have any manufacturing facilities. I'm sure they probably have some decent IP and with their software, but like, what are they?
I could see it going like Scout did, which is like, kind of like gets folded into something and then emerges 20, 30 years later. You know?
Yeah. I don't think Henrik is done. Actually, I honestly don't want to try to continue to go. I mean, Fisker there's still a lot of legal going on in the background. I don't know the specifics, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone just bought them up to do something. And I noticed with EVs, there has to be novelty. And I think that's what we're seeing today. For a lot of gas cars, everyday NPC traffic, as we call it, right? Everyday cars.
PC cars.
NPC cars. For your higher end vehicles that would often have, right, crazy numbers and loud engines, there isn't there for electric vehicles anymore. And like the Fisker, it was decent range. Nothing crazy about it, nothing to write home about. It was an okay platform, but there was nothing novelty about it. There was nothing like this.
It was very expensive too. I think that's the thing too, at least for the launch edition, like $70K. Like, sure, it had California mode. And to be fair, I did drive the Fisker Ocean actually in West Palm Beach, Florida, because I interviewed an owner, and then he's like, do you want to drive it? And I happened to be in Florida that week. So we were driving down, I forgot what highway, but it was a really cool experience just to drive that car. Yeah, I mean, California mode, which is pretty awesome, but like, is that worth $70,000 when you can get a Model Y for like 40 with the tax credit? Its value proposition wasn't really there for me.
That's exactly it. I mean, California mode was cool. It's got to be something nuts. Like, we're gonna have tank turn, which never materialized. But I think it's just a funky look. Like, you talk to people, the Fisker Ocean design looked very like casual. And And right, even the Model Y, it's kind of a casual vehicle now today, but Tesla has the infrastructure, they have the amazing software, they have something that they are great at. The Fisker, on the other hand, there was nothing that they were just amazing at. And I think that's what something has to write home about. I mean, Lucid has the best range EV. And for some, that's interesting. That's like, okay, we have some technology here. We have something about the company that's different. Rivian made the first electric truck and has some crazy lights. And even Rivian, I think, maybe I'm kind of dissolving my own argument. I guess, what's crazy about Rivian, now that I think about it?
I think they did a great job with the brand, right? Like,
Yeah,
they were
Holy
kind of like
cow,
the
their
first.
brand.
Yeah, they were the first like
Yeah.
pickup truck, and as one of the like launch edition owners as well, I noticed that a lot of people that owned it weren't really like your standard truck folks, right? Like you don't buy the R1T for a work truck, you buy it because it's an adventure vehicle, right? Which I think that's what they did that was different, that was better. But there's not so many people that can do that. Like Fisker, I don't think it had a good brand. Like it was basically in my mind like another German vehicle made in the US. Like it was like an Audi / BMW type look with, okay, maybe like the solar roof, but to your point, Andrew, like it wasn't anything to write home about, you know, like the performance wasn't super amazing. It wasn't like super fancy. It didn't have extreme tech. It was just like kind of mediocre in all those categories, right?
Yeah. And that was an interesting thing when I had to like interview those Fisker owners. This was like right before Fisker was going bankrupt. So I had to interview some Fisker owners. And like some of them were like desperately trying to justify their purchase. So like, yeah, this is like light years better than like a Tesla. Like it's not going to kill me with FSD, like all this stuff. And they were like just saying how it was like this greatest vehicle ever made. And I'm like, I mean, it's all right. Like, let's be honest here. Like, it's not that crazy. But yeah, that's a interesting chapter in automotive history. Just seeing I think that's probably the first time in history, like at least recently, like last 50, 100 years, that a company tried something, went bankrupt, and then had their founder try it again and also go bankrupt. And it is a sad story because like obviously people working there, etc. But like, yeah, definitely an interesting phase in the history of the automobile.
I think it's going to be like the DeLorean, you know, like the DeLorean, super interesting concept. People really enjoyed it, but it's kind of like a novelty now, right?
Give it some time. Give it a couple.
And that's another conversation, the like respawn of DeLorean, because there's two of them. And I actually knew the chief management officer of the new Rivian, and then they had a beef with the daughter of John DeLorean. So like the actual John DeLorean, his daughter like also wanted to create DeLorean, and I think she got mad at one of the articles I wrote about. It's a long story. So yeah, it's a very chaotic space right now. But before we wrap up this podcast, Isaiah, I have a big question to ask you. And when are you starting VinFast updates? Because I think this is something that a lot of people want to very curious about.
Yeah, no, actually, great question. Look, no. About VinFast, Francie from Out of Spec,
she has one, and it's not a bad car. I don't think it's that bad. Some people are like, "This is the worst thing ever," and I'm like, "It's not that bad." Like, let's be honest here. And the lease prices are great.
Yeah, that's where you get it. The leases.
Yeah.
I saw 3 on a truck trailer the other day, and I texted Franny,
Really?
"Oh, look, it's a VinFast." But yeah, if you're curious about VinFast, I'm doing like a whole like interview with her to talk about like getting people about what's happening. But something that's in my head, I'm glad you mentioned the brand, David, because maybe it's not the novelty factor. It's the fact that you have a brand that has something special, and that's how you really sell vehicles. But yeah, VinFast updates coming very soon. Just stay tuned. You know, I'll let you guys know when it comes on.
All right.
Very
Thank you very much for joining this week.
I'm glad. Yeah, this was awesome.
Thanks.